Oi, gente, só para avisar vocês, tá dando um problema aqui, que das outras vezes a gente não teve, que era logar na conta institucional para conseguir fazer a transmissão. Das outras vezes, não sei porque se o computador que a gente usou ele já estava logado, o que que aconteceu. Mas dessa vez ele não está logado e não é uma conta que eu, pelo menos, tenho acesso. A gente chamou o Hércules, ele também não sabe. E aí a gente está pensando em só mandar o link do Zoom geral e aí as pessoas entram e assistem por aqui mesmo.
Então, a Cibele colocou ali uma mensagem, mas eu reforço que se não funciona essa transmissão ao vivo, a gente pode gravar e depois pedir para o Thomas colocar no canal,
Sim, já estou
tá?
gravando já.
Melhor. Oi, Dani. Tudo bem?
Mas fora a transição já está tudo em ordem aqui. Vou colocar para compartilhar os slides dela. E deixa eu só mudar essa câmera só tá para lá. Mandaram? Ah, eu vou logar aqui então.
Precisa. Tô tempo.
Mas tá tudo pronto, é só logar no meio. Mesmo. Você que sabe. Evento 4.if. Arroba. É, evento4.if.br. Você consegue editar para mim, por favor?
E comercial, D maiúsculo,
D maiúsculo,
E comercial de novo,
D comercial,
N minúsculo,
N minúsculo?
isso, T de tatu, minúsculo,
Aham.
letra ou não, é zero,
Zero.
P maiúsculo,
D maiúsculo,
exclamação,
esse.
Então provavelmente vai ser um.
Não, mas vamos
Sim, gente, para demorar, é super pontual.
Pronto. Vocês estão ouvindo, será por aqui ou pelo microfone? Vamos fazer o teste do som.
Os microfones estão desligados.
Estão desligados? Fala para ela falar no microfone para ver se vai sair suficiente. Não, é porque o microfone é para quem está acompanhando pelo Zoom.
Nas caixinhas estão saindo, tem que ver se pega lá.
Isso. Porque aqui eu acho que, como elas estão me ouvindo, elas estão ouvindo pelo computador. Aí tem que testar. Sim, sim. Não, é só trocar aqui, não é? Para os dois microfones tirar.
Ok. Podemos começar? Sim, teste. Pronto. Aí você pode pôr a apresentação dela, por favor. Não foi. Tem uma janela que estranha. Como é que eu faço para passar? Mariana, não está passando aqui, ó, os slides. Pode ajudar? Ah, tá com o... Podemos? Ah, tá bom, não, tudo bem.
Boa tarde a todas as pessoas. Good afternoon. Hoje, aqui no seminário do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Interunidades em Ensino de Ciências, temos o prazer de receber a professora Laurie Katz. Ela é professora do Departamento de Ensino e Aprendizagem da Universidade da The Ohio State University e estuda a infância, a educação infantil e formação de professores com as questões de inclusão, narrativas, relações entre famílias, comunidades, relacionadas com crianças pequenas, na perspectiva da etnografia na educação. Laurie está aqui pelo programa, por meio, como professora visitante pelo Print CAPES, e é coautora de estudos com pesquisadores brasileiros, né, trabalhando de forma genuinamente colaborativa, por exemplo, com a nossa outra convidada, a professora Vanessa Neves, professora associada da Faculdade de Educação, vice-diretora da Faculdade de Educação atualmente, e que fez também seu pós-doutorado na Ohio State University sob supervisão da professora Laurie Katz. Ela é coordenadora do Grupo de Estudos em Cultura, Educação e Infância e desenvolve um programa de pesquisa longitudinal e etnográfico, denominado Infância e Escolarização, em que um grupo de bebês é acompanhado desde a sua inserção na instituição escolar até a saída para o ensino fundamental. Então, agradecemos imensamente a presença de vocês e a palavra.
Hello, thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Professor Daniela Scarpa, Professor Danusa Mumford, for inviting us to be here today, this afternoon. Professor Laurie Katz and I will be presenting this research on researchers' subjectivities in studying young children. It's important to mention that we understand subjectivity as the whole psychological system, which means that includes all of our psychological functions, such as memory, thought, language. And we take a cultural historical psychology perspective, which means that we become humans in the contact, in interaction with the other in the world. So when we talk about subjectivities, we are not talking about something that happens inside my mind only. My mind is forged in the interactions that we establish with the other, in the interactions through language, through the languages in use. So our affects, our cognitions are not something that, as I said, inside my mind, but they are socially situated. We understand subjectivity, therefore, as our whole psychological system that has stable features as we grow. As we are developing, we are establishing some ways of being in the world, but those ways, those features, they also change as we are human beings, as we are all the time in interacting with the other. So therefore, we have stable features in our subjectivities, but also we have features that change over time. And in this presentation, we are focusing on the researcher's process of development, on the researcher's subjectivities, as we, as researchers, as we change, as we encounter our participants. So we are not a fly on the wall. We are interacting, we are caring for, we are observing, participating, reflecting, imagining, creating, as we are encountering our participants. So in this process, we may become conscious of what is happening with our participants and with ourselves. We are becoming conscious of the research process. So that's what we are going to talk about today. We are going to start off talk a little bit about ethnography as a way of knowing, a little bit about becoming conscious, about two concepts, drama and perigevany, concepts by the Russian psychologist Vygotsky. We are going to focus on some events at the Early Childhood Education Center Tupi in Brazil. And we are going to talk about a STEAM project that Laurie has developed in the US at the Ohio State. And then we are going to draw some conclusions. So I'll pass it to Laurie to talk a little bit about ethnography as a way of knowing.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if they added, but Vanessa and I have been researching together almost eight years, I think. And although I wasn't actively involved in the data collection that that Vanessa is going to talk about in the first project, I was very involved in the analysis and the writing of the project. And our passion, as you'll see, is young children. is young children, infant toddlers through 8 years of age, although we don't neglect the older, but we do have a passion for this. um, we both have done ethnographic approaches here, and I want to briefly talk about ethnography as a way of knowing, a philosophy of research. We are not calling it a method at all. So if we back up and we look at a way of knowing, we ask some questions. When do we know? And how do we know? As a researcher, we often first have what we call in ethnography an outsider perspective, trying to gain an insider or emic perspective by learning about the culture of the social group that we are studying. In this case, young children and the early childhood teachers. We begin studies as ethnographers in the role of a participant observer. As a participant observer, we start collecting data via field notes in the field, interviews, collecting artifacts, videotaping what we see. And we often start our analysis during the process of data collection. This analysis is often very messy, a very messy process, but there is a system to the process that is iterative, going back and forth through the data. It's also recursive. It's also abductive. How do we actually make sense and become conscious of the data? Question, does one need to become conscious and then make sense of the data? We argue that you become conscious as you are working with the data, working back and forth, analyzing, looking at rich points, at using those as anchors and following it to enough to get findings of what we are seeing of the social group. So today we'll talk about how the researcher becomes conscious of aspects of the data that they actually hadn't considered when they were first looking at the data.
Yes. So we are going to focus on the process of becoming conscious throughout the research process. So consciousness as a part of human subjectivity, it becomes a part of the reflection process. We are taking a Marxist dialectical point of view with Vygotsky. So consciousness and activity constitute a unity. Uh, Becoming the consciousness carries the immanent, the possibility of making others emerge and reconstructs the person who performs such activity. So we act in the world and we become conscious, and then as we become conscious, we act and transform ourselves in the process. We may transform. It's, of course, it's not cause and effect relationship, it's a possibility. So the activity of research may transform the researcher as she becomes conscious of what is happening to the group, but also becoming conscious about what happens to herself and to the research itself. So, becoming conscious, it may prompt the researcher's development. We are there in the field with our questions, in this case, to better understand young children's development. But we are also arguing that the researcher herself is culturally developing. So we are registering, we are video recording the infant's development. But in this process, we as researcher, we are also developing. And we argue that there are some guiding principles throughout this process, which are we care for our participants. We care for the relationships that we establish with our participants. We participate and observe, but we also reflect and imagine possible solutions. We create ways of presenting the data. So we go through these guiding principles, but what gives those guiding principles density, what is it's the vector, we may say, what supports this whole process is the process of becoming conscious. So consciousness, as I was saying, is the result of human action, being symbolic as well as technical, meaning we act and we produce meanings. We live in the world through language. We think about the world mediated by meaning. We create meaning as we act. So human consciousness is a construct that involves a product of social intercourse, social relationships. The study of consciousness concerns the study of material life. We actually act in the world to which humans are subjected, where humans not only affect the environment, we do act in the world through practical activity. But this is very important. But we also change, humans also change their affective relation with others and with the material world. And that carries the possibility of changing herself. So that's what we are trying to look at. And as we look through these encounters with infants, we may understand this process through Vygotsky's notion of perizhivani, which means the unity between the person and the environment. They constitute a unity that changes and develops throughout time. It's not only the person that changes, but also the environment where this person is acting on. This unity, Giovanni expresses also the unity between biology and cultural development. And this is very important as we think of a unity, not as isolated parts coming together, but elements turning into something different. So in this case, the encounters with infants provokes the researchers' experiences. As they encounter different moments with the infants, they may construct different meanings, different perspectives of what is happening to them, to the infants, and also to themselves. So we are going to examine 4 events that took place at the Brazilian Early Childhood Education Center. As Laurie was saying, we are going to focus on some events that belong to this project, Childhood and Schooling, that I coordinate along with Professor Maria de Fátima Cardoso Gomes. Both of us coordinate this program where we follow this group of infants throughout their schooling process in early childhood education. Since they were infants, really 10 months old, until they go to elementary education. So we began this project in 2017, and we followed the same group throughout 2022. But we had COVID right in the middle, so we are going to focus here on the data between 2017 and 2019. And it's also important to say, as Laurie mentioned, Laurie has been a very dear collaborator, and we've been writing and talking about this data with her and analyzing it together. So as we usually joke about, Laurie is the outsider ethnographer for this project, as she's always questioning what is happening. So this project took place at this early childhood center that we named MA to P. We did participant observation 2-3 times a week. In 2017, 42% out of the 200 school days. In 2018 and 2019. We were video recording the whole time, and we have 900 hours of video records. We have field notes, we have interviews with teachers, families, and our participants were 12 children and their teachers. And as Laurie was saying, as we were navigating through this data, we encountered some rich points. I forgot to mention that we have a research team with undergrad students, grad students, and professors. There are maybe 10, 12 of us that went to the field, video record whole process. So sometimes one researcher would analyze what other researcher has recorded. So it's a process of going back and forth into the data. So in 2018, the second year of the research, Elenice, one of the PhD students at that time, now she's a professor, but at the time she was a PhD student, she was beginning to record the daily life, the routines in this group. And Elenice was very interested in play, but she didn't know what play would look like with children who were not even 2 years old. These kids here in the beginning of 2008 were about 18, 20 months old. And one day she was at the beginning of the school year, she was video recording and she saw that those 3 kids playing a very traditional singing game, Atirei o Pau no Gato, that we all know. It's a very traditional Brazilian singing game. And she became surprised And because in the lit review, we found out that those singing games, they appear in childhood cultures later on when children are 5, 6 years old. So we were wondering, how come such young children learn to play this Brazilian traditional game? How did they appropriate this cultural routine? So we didn't know how come this happened. And Elenice talked to the research team and she asked us, did you guys know where this singing game came from? And we didn't know. And we said, no, there was no singing game in the first year of the research. And Elenice said, okay. And then she went to interview the teachers. She asked the teachers, guys, you know how did kids learn how to play this singing game? And the teacher said, of course, we taught them last year when they were in the first year in the early childhood center. And, and we were very surprised that we didn't know that. And we said, we were in the first year of the research. We were there 2, 3 times a week. We video recorded everything. How come we didn't see any singing game? So what Elenice did was go backwards in the video data. And then, next slide, please. And then covered that, in fact, there were a lot of singing games in throughout the daily routine. Would sing the singing games. Sometimes they would ask the children, the infants at the time, to play with them. And in December, we found this video record of those 2 little boys, Paulo and Carlos, playing the singing game. You can see on the second frame where Paulo is saying meow, and then he goes down. And then Carlo goes down. And then they play for a very short period of time about the singing game. And we asked ourselves, how come we video recorded this, but we didn't see it? We didn't analyze it, and we didn't even remember about it. So as we were watching this over and over again, we realized that Luisa, who was an undergrad student recording this scene at this moment, she put the video record on, but then an infant came and he was worried that he had pooped in his diapers. And he was saying, I pooped, I pooped. And Louise was really worried about caring for this infant. And so she called the teacher. So at the same time as Louisa was video recording, participating and observing the context, she was also caring for the participants. She cared that the infant was uncomfortable with a dirty diaper. So we became conscious of 2 things. One, that sometimes we video record a lot of cultural routines, but we don't always see. We knew that from the lit review, but we didn't become conscious of that right until this moment. And this was a process for the whole research team, not only for Luisa, not only for Elenice, but for the whole research team. Yes, we do video record a lot of things that we don't know of. We have to go back and forth through the data. And as we became conscious that this singing game has been going on since the first year of these infants in this daycare center, we thought it would be important for Elenice in 2018 to follow this routine. So in April, she was able to pay attention and video record a singing game that took place among the little girls. The little girls were playing. One asked the other, let's play. And they started, atirei o pau no gato, and they sat down and they got up. And so Lucy became conscious of the importance of this singing game for this group. And then finally, in June 2018, Elenice not only became conscious, it was an important cultural routine for this group, but she purposefully decided to pursue the singing game. So in this event, Eleni said the kids were in the playground, they were all over the place, and she was focusing on the three little girls playing with a red ball. Those two first frames. But then she realized that there was a singing game taking place right at the back. So she changed her focus from the little girls playing with the red ball and chose to focus on the singing game that was taking place. And we analyzed this singing game process in a different article. But what became evident and what we are trying to discuss here is the process of becoming conscious for the research herself and for the research team. How we choose to focus on different routines, on different elements, on different dimensions that are important to participants and become important to the researchers. So the encounters with the infants in those four events demonstrate this process, makes visible, as we were saying this morning, makes visible the researcher process of becoming aware, of becoming conscious of what is happening. So it demonstrates how we are developing as researchers and as human beings.
Okay, as we turn to this study that I'm going to present in terms of becoming conscious, we're working with a little older children, 3 to 5 years old, a couple years older, and we're exploring with these young children and the teachers the intersections of art with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We took what you would call a STEAM approach that was very similar to a type of arts-based pedagogy type of approach. And we know, and this is a development from STEM to STEAM. So what's happening here is we're looking at art as tying in the other subject or discipline areas here. And we know there's a lot of benefits of doing these kinds of, or enacting these types of activities with older children, elementary, secondary. We know that they can become very creative. It helps them become very curious of what's happening. We know it helps them, it promotes problem solving activities and definitely increases their self-esteem. But what we don't know is well, we found that young teachers of younger children are having challenges in implementing STEAM activities. Why is this important? In the United States, they are doing very basic kinds of skill types of things, activities with children that is not promoting problem solving, really the capabilities that they already have. And when we look at these children, as I do, that are going to be our future leaders, we better do something earlier to really set up a mindset and of how that these are going to be our future leaders and how do we help them be creative and solve the most difficult problems that we are going to have or they will have in their lifetime. So if you turn, so the study was grounded in an ethnographic logic of inquiry, and we called the project that we did Project ABLE, Arts-Based Learning Exploration. And we had myself as one of the researchers and another researcher from a teacher education program at Ohio State. And we also involved an art educators from a community-based organization to come into this early childhood center, and we were invited in to really help the teachers and the art educators think about other ways of doing art with the children. We didn't have the answers. What we did is we brought in some very non-traditional art materials from the environment, leaves, twigs, pipe cleaners, stones, as well as glue, tape, not just regular Scotch tape because that doesn't work, but cardboard, a lot of recycled cardboard. Blue, we have heavy blue tape that really worked well. And we brought these materials in, and we didn't have a definite, you're going to make a particular product. We're going to work with the materials, and the teachers are going to help the children work with the materials. So, and that's where what we were looking at. Our research question was, how do teacher educators support teachers' strategies as they develop children's higher level skills through the use of art materials? What happened is the first remark from the teachers after doing these activities, which I found was a rich point, was the children had this, they were so excited about their attention span and how long they focused on these activities. And myself, who knows about early childhood development, I say you give kids materials that are interesting for them, and you just tell them, you give them the agency to manipulate, of course, they're going to have. But this was kind of a rich point, and I was thinking, this is not helping my research question. And what do I have to do to see this? So one of the things I did is I analyzed, if we go to the next frame, I analyzed through Spradley's semantic relationships. He has kind of an X relationship to Y, and he looks at 9 aspects that are part of every cultural situation. And what I did is I looked at 4 of these 9 elements to better understand maybe where the teachers were coming from and how I can support the teachers. So if you look at the first relationship with strict inclusion, and we found that the researcher's frame of reference, which is your second column, is art, and we looked at the art activities, is a kind of pedagogical approach for promoting young children's higher level thinking. That was our framework. But the teacher's initial framework was, art activities is a pedagogical approach for promoting children's exploration. That they weren't going any further. Just let them explore. Let them see what they can do with the materials. And then when we looked at function, we found that from the researcher's standpoint, we looked at children's meaning making was a function of using these art materials. But our teachers had a different framework because they were looking at children making products, that the products was really important here, not the process of what they were doing, but the product was important because they wanted to be able to show the families what their kids could do. They wanted to show administrators, visitors, look what we're doing in preschool, looking how we're meeting the standards here. And then when you look at the next slide, a means to an end, our framework here was figuring out how to use the materials and thinking that those are important steps to learning how to problem solve and create. So we wanted the teachers to go beyond the exploration so they could really see that these materials how they use the materials were important steps. So it was a means to an end, where the teacher's initial frame was teachers had certain steps that they wanted kids to follow, and everybody had to follow the same steps in order to make something. And I'm sure if you looked at early childhood programs, not the best ones, but many of them will just have all these products where they're really ignoring the process. And we really wanted to get the teachers to focus more on the process. And then the final activity, and this is where we get into more process, is the sequence. What's a sequence that is needed for art making? And our thinking of the researchers is that children varied in their processes of how they engaged in the activities according to their curiosities, interests, and making meaning from the materials. Whereas the teachers' art activities involve children using skills that they have already mastered. And this was very clear. There were sometimes they wouldn't have children use scissors yet, even though you have the children's scissors. They don't know. They would say the toddlers, they don't know how to use the material, the scissors. They don't know how to use the glue. They don't know how to use tape, punch makers. And we wanted them to say, wow, they would actually learn the skills as they're doing. And it wasn't a process, it wasn't a sequence that you want to wait. So this is where they were initially. And we did find that they shifted. That the teachers shifted their ways of thinking, but it took time. The project was going for at least 2 years, and we would work in their classroom twice a month. Sometimes we did weekly, We started during COVID, so of course there were interruptions, but we had them planning with us. They were always planning the activities. We had them reflecting because we knew the power of reflecting. And if the teachers could reflect, then we could, then they could maybe observe more that was going on with what was going on with the children in their activities. But it took time. It took a lot of time, and what we found is we needed to look at the videos. But let me step back. I was still trying to go back to my research question. What were the teachers doing? How to support them? I was not this having the frames of reference didn't help me yet. All it helped me understand where they were coming from, but I still had to move these teachers to another place, and I'm not sure where that place was, but that was really important. So I go back to another rich point that I had in the interviews. And what happens in the rich point in this interview is I was trying to ask teachers, well, what did you do? How did you support them? It wasn't coming through. One teacher said to me, you have to let go. I thought, you have to let go. What's meant by letting go? I was thinking, I was still looking, and I really had to think about my own assumptions about how I thought they should learn, how I thought they should, be taught this. And when they said you have to let go, then I realized that there was more that I didn't know. And I went back into the videotapes, because we videotaped as much as we could the children's activity. So what I've been able to do is show you a videotape of the activity. Before you play it, hopefully we can hear it. We did not try it. Oh, it's a PDF. Okay. I might be able to go into it, but if you can't, that's okay. It's all right. We can do this. So what I found is, I think you can at least see this. So let me give you a framework of what's happening here, because what I had to do, and I titled this, What to Do About the Glue. So in this scenario, you have 9 children. They're working at 2 tables, 5 at one table, 4 at another, with 2 teachers placed at each table. Children are working with the following materials for this art activity. We have cardboard, we have toilet paper, toilet rolls, glue, scissors, popsicle sticks, that's a big thing, aluminum foil, and they were just kind of told to make their creations. You have kids standing and sitting, some are sitting, they're working with the materials. One child stands, moving one of their hands with the scissors in different positions in attempts to cut through. He's using a scissor in attempts to cut through a toilet paper roll wrapped with aluminum foil. Another child is sitting next to him and observes the child cutting for several seconds, and then he goes on, okay, good, and then returns to his attention back to what he's doing. Children interact with the teachers and children in a variety of ways. So what this was so good is I could actually capture how the teachers were working or supporting the children as they're making their creations. And this is very important in research. We need to not just look at the teachers and talk to them about this, but we also, in that ethnography is really able to lend us, is an approach to really see the process of them actually working with the materials. So I want to, before I show this, is to go over a transcript with you. If you can just kind of go through that, and I'll just kind of talk with you about this, because you may not be able to hear it all. So, so what you have is a teacher, a child, and you have JJ, who's the art teacher. So you have a child saying, JJ, come over here. It's stucked. Kids in English with the ED, it takes time in the past tense to use. It's stucked. The teacher is saying, see how the glue is coming out. You are using a lot of glue on your box. What are you going to use the glue for? The child says, pop it up. Teacher, you're going to pop it up. I think this is just plenty. Right here, see that? If that doesn't work, this is another teacher saying, if that doesn't work, then there is one more option. You can try to tape it. JJ, see how the glue works. Here's some more stuff. So real quickly, what you're starting to see the teachers do is they're starting to really focus on problem solving and helping the kids work with the glue. Obviously, you have to monitor the glue, but they don't care. They've gotten through the fact that this is messy, got to do that. But that really came, initially they weren't using glue because, again, they thought you needed these particular skills. So you have the teachers helping them think through some of this problem solving. The teacher on the second column, if you wanted to do this, can be sit and let it dry. JJ, can I have some of this? The child, and JJ says, you sure can. And the child said, made a basement. Here's a basement. This was the child's creation. I need some more. Teacher, what kind of machine are you making? So where we were, this was a great open-ended kind of question, knowing that the child is making some kind of machine. And often in early childhood, we say, tell me something, we say, we have them say, what did you make? But this was more about the process. Tell me what you're making, how you're making it. The teacher says, what kind of machine are you making? You're going to do it all by yourself. Making a robot, show me the robot. A child says, I'm going to let it dry. And that's a very interesting kind of part of the process. They're learning that you use something that's wet, you have to let it dry, and then you're going to let it dry. And the child says, I don't need this anymore. So I'm hoping if we can try and see how this works.
That's a solid. Yeah, you have it. That's a solid. Yes, you have the Well, how do you keep it together? From this bottom part, and it just comes up like this. See how the glue is coming up? Oh. Now, you are using a lot of glue in your box. What are you gonna use that glue for? You're gonna pop it up. So when we're using our glue, we don't need to pop it up that much. I think this is just plenty right here.
Pessoal, não está passando o vídeo, só estou avisando.
You didn't know I had Portuguese in there.
See how glue works?
There she goes, yeah, it was helpful because but then she lets go.
No? It's all glue, look. You gonna do it all by yourself? Look. Take this.
You sure can, but trust
And then
Oh, good.
rub it on there.
What are you making? You made a
Do you need some help?
It broke.
And then put more glue in here.
That's good. You want to use that too? And
What do you make? What kind of machine are you making?
Show me the robot. Oh my goodness, that is so cool. Right.
I'm
You're
gonna let it dry.
Wow, that is so cool. Yeah.
And make the other leg. The way I'm gonna eat it.
So in terms of the figuring out, you have to let go. The teacher was doing everything, teaching them, directing them all the time how to do something. And in terms of doing that, they really weren't seeing the process and the creative work and the problem solving skills that kids are capable of themselves. So they're shifting. They're shifting. I don't, is this a place that they seem happy to be? We do see the students, we do see the children doing, they're focusing more on the problem solving. And I later did another X to Y, learning the semantic relationships, where I really was able to see some of these shifts in the from their initial frame of reference about thinking about art making to where they are now. Why this is meaningful? Too often in our professional development work, we're telling teachers how to do something. And what happens is there's a lot of contextual issues that teachers have to consider. And also, they have their own ways of doing things and letting go. And quite honestly, it's better for them to give them the support to take up what we're hoping they're going to take up in their own ways. So.
So we argue that these examples, these one from Brazil and one from the United States, reveals to us that human connections experienced at those two schools became a source of development for the researchers. We, as the research team, we became conscious of what's happening and what was important for those. We learned how we dealt with the research, the video recording, how to position ourselves in the research process, as well as Laurie learning what letting go means
Yes.
for those teachers, and because she had to go
Yes.
some of her own assumptions as well. So these connections are a source of development for us as researchers, as well as for the young children and their teachers. So it's a two-way process. Usually we on what is happening with teachers or what's happening with the infants or relations between them, and we are trying to shed light or to highlight the importance for the researcher as well. So
We argue that reflecting and acting involves a process of appropriation and creation so that the nature of the research is both effective and cognitive, to present a Persavani. It's not possible to admire, to look closely, to be involved, to be with the other without being affected. There is movement through approximation, distancing, and rapprochement, because with each visit to the field, with each return to the data, something new has the possibility of emerging and transforming us. These are dramatic initial sensory impressions and perceptions that we need to effectively cognitively select, look at again, associate with, disassociate from, reintegrate, categorize, elaborate on, and rework. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Question. I'm sorry, I forgot the video thing. I was thinking we needed to.
We need to, yeah, the time.
Yes. Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Olá, alguém pode traduzir para mim? Obrigado.
Pode sim.
Essa questão de levar para se envolver na pesquisa, de se afetar, né? Essa questão a gente coloca na pesquisa escrita? Por exemplo, essa história de voltar no vídeo, de rever o vídeo. A gente coloca esses detalhes ou a gente coloca mais no geral na metodologia?
Details, or do we just go straight to the results?
We have to do it in a couple of ways. And yes, it's very important to first talk about our positionalities. And as we're looking at our positionalities, we're looking at why we're doing this research, what are our assumptions, what is our background in terms of doing this. And so myself as an early childhood educator, teacher educator, research for young children, as I said, I am extremely passionate about this. And that's why I was focusing on the capabilities, very upset with what's happening. Yeah, when you do write up your research, if you're doing an ethnographic approach, it is this way of knowing. How do you move from your rich points? How do you use the anchors? So that is part of your analysis. How do you go from the anchor to following, looking back as Vanessa did in terms of the videos, talking to, the interviews. So that process is extremely important. Yes.
Boa tarde. Vou falar em português, Vanessa. Essa noção do becoming conscious, eu percebo que as perguntas, the questions can change. The questions change? Yes. My question for you is, quando vocês usam diferentes estratégias para coletar dados. Observation, video recordings, field notes. Vocês compõem um conjunto de dados, um volume, um conjunto de dados grande. E, então, você pode usar um mesmo conjunto de dados para diferentes questões de pesquisas numa equipe, seria isso, minha pergunta. Uma pesquisa em equipe mais larga. Uma questão mais ampla com vários recortes. Resumindo, essa mudança de questões possível, como articular isso com o recorte para uma questão inicial, entende? Que eu Yes. 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 You can start.
Okay. This is a very interesting question because that's what we're trying to achieve in our research program called Childhood and Schooling. We have a broad question, which is to better understand the cultural development of infants and toddlers in a collective school setting. So we want to understand their cultural development over time, throughout a period of time, a 6-year period of time. But that's a very broad question. And how do we do that? We want to look at different dimensions of cultural development, such as play. Play is a guiding activity of children's cultural development. So we want to understand a little bit of what does play look like in this setting with this group. So this question about play relates and supports and helps me better understand the cultural development of children, one of their dimensions. We also want to understand, for example, children's autonomy regarding their psychomotor activities. So we have another researcher looking at that, and so on and so forth. So the research team is all guided by these broad questions, but each researcher herself chooses one smaller dimension that is connected to the broader one. So that's why it's a research program.
Yeah, this is a great question. Because the question here, how do teacher educators support teacher strategies as they develop children's higher level skills through the use of art materials? That's what I took from the study. Because yes, with the database, you have a lot of data. And what do you want to talk about? And also, how is it going to fit? You know, there could be particular themes that you want to think about. So this was one way of looking at this. I could have also looked at language development here with the children, because that came out in a quantitative aspect of this study, that there was a real increase in the teacher-child interactions between of the language, and that's a biggie for young children in terms of cognitive and where they're going. So I think it just depends of where kind of the question you have, and then what data do you have to support it? Because often when people write up studies, they're all over the place with the findings, and it's almost like too much. So you do have to find a focal point and be very systematic, maybe coherent in terms of how you are addressing that question.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the whole presentation. It was awesome. I have actually a lot of questions, but I'm gonna just make two of them. The first one, as a teacher, both a teacher and a researcher, I think about it a lot, because when you are in the position of the researcher, you have a goal, something that you want to specifically look at, and when you're in the position of the teacher, you are paying attention to a whole bunch of different things. So the question would be, if when the researcher is introduced to the classroom, um, if that somehow affects the teacher in the sense that they become more aware of the process that they are going through, um, in comparison to when he's just teaching his class without the presence of the researcher, because he's maybe more involved in the process of teaching and less concerned about the process of the research that's going on. And the other thing is, okay. Okay. Okay, okay.
So clarify this again. You want the researcher is both, they're acting in the role of the researcher, but they're also a teacher in that classroom, or they just have a role as a teacher?
No, I was clarifying that I thought about this because I am a teacher and I am also a researcher, not mixing these two things. But when I'm in the position where I'm the teacher, I perceive that it's harder for us to gather the type of information that a researcher would gather, because we are concerned with different things than what the researcher would be concerned about. But when you have a teacher in the class and and the researcher gets into the classroom with him, maybe the process of the teacher becomes more self-aware, because you have another presence in there that's making the teacher go back to the fact that there's a research going on in there and more stuff to
Let me see if I understood you. You were asking about the teacher becomes affected by the researcher, and the teacher might change or become aware or maybe even become conscious of their own practices and how that relates to the research.
Part of this starts when you're trying to select a teacher to actually do research in their classroom. I have to, they need to be open. You need to talk about what you're trying to do in the classroom in terms of the research. There is a situation where you do have to look at the dynamics. Here you have another teacher. I mean, myself, who knows something about inclusive practices, and I teach about inclusion. When I went in to look at inclusive practices, the teacher was saying, am I doing it right? What am I doing? And I think you just have, I mean, that will happen. And you just say, I'm not here to tell you, what you're doing. I mean, you're great. You're doing great. I would never be in the position of a researcher telling the teacher that they need to do something else. And I don't try to get into anything about critiquing. Now, of course, I'm going to come in as a teacher with my own assumptions about what should be doing, that should be done. And yeah, you need to work that out. You need to keep a diary. Why are they doing this? I wouldn't do this in my classroom. It may be something you need to look at more. You need to understand more. And there you may start interviewing the teacher as a way of trying to understand what the teacher is doing. So it's being aware of this. It's also creating a relationship. You don't want the teacher to kick you out of your classroom. And I'm serious. I mean, that can happen. You want I go in there as a helper. I go in there as an assistant. I clean up. I know what kind of messes kids are going to make. I clean up. I do the put all the materials out on the table. I do whatever I can to make the teachers' lives easier because I know they are not getting paid well. And that's the other thing. There's a big differential relationship in the United States between university professors and $17 an hour, that preschool teachers are getting paid outside of the schools. It's horrible. So I have to do what I can to try to change the dynamics. Try to change, oh, she's from the university. She knows everything. I have to be aware of that and try my best to change that. Fortunately, in this early childhood program, we had already been working with the teachers. So we had they felt good about us.
Yes, and also I think we are going to change anyhow. When someone comes into the classroom, we always change. I was a teacher myself, an elementary teacher. And of course, when someone would come up, I would change. But if you establish a good relationship with the teachers, as Laurie was mentioning, then you can become closer and be conscious of what is happening and be aware really that this is happening. But that's part of the research. That's not, that doesn't go in the way, it's part of what we are doing because we are interacting with other human beings.
Thank you very much. And the second question, I guess, is shorter, but you are working with very little children, and and then some ages, bigger, those of bigger ages as well. But for example, in the song process, if you were to work with a high school with older students, if you ask them, where did you learn that? They would answer themselves. But the kids, sometimes they are not aware of how they've learned. They are picking those things up, and you have to go for the teacher. So the question is, if in the process of the research, you realized, you noted, perceived that the kids were becoming aware of the presence of the researcher as a researcher. For example, because I guess that in the beginning, um, there was someone different in the class. They didn't know who that was. But if they started to realize that that person was somehow gathering information, was there to study what was happening in some way, and started giving the data in a different way.
Well, yes, since, thank you for the question, first of all. Uh, we, in the case of my study, myself and my team were in the field right at the first day. We had all the consents from the families before the school year began. So right at the first day, we were there. And we were with the video recorder because we had consents and we gradually introduced the video recording. Um, and the kids realized very soon that we were in the classroom, that we were adults, but we were not the teachers. We had a different role because we were there video recording. They weren't conscious about why we were recording, but they realized that that was that was what we did. But they also realized that they could come to us and say, pooped, I have pooped. We wouldn't change their diapers, but we would ask the teacher, oh, Lucio has pooped. Do you want me to go and take him to you? Uh, the infants and toddlers quickly realized that we would not discipline them in any way. We wouldn't let them get hurt, of course, if they were doing something very disruptive. We would, of course, try to stop them, but calling the teacher, saying, please see that this conflict is happening between them. So they realized that we had a different role. They quickly realized that. And one thing that we are starting to work on is we were there to register their cultural development, and we were observing them, but they were also observing us. So they appropriated our ways of doing things into their own play. So, for instance, they would get some black plastic, piece of plastic, to be their video recorder. And they would pretend that they were video recording us. So we were a part of that cultural group in a different way than a teacher. But we were adults and we were becoming a part of what was happening. Therefore, we were also prompting children's development as they observe what we are doing, as they get a black plastic thing to video record. That means that we are, as researchers, that we are getting into their play activity, and play is very important for that age. So we are becoming a part of their development. We are not just registering their development. we are becoming a part of that as well, in a different way from that of the teacher. So, and that happens in also for the teachers themselves, because when they become conscious that they are being observed and they become conscious of their own practices, they might change or not, you know, but that may prompt teachers' development as well.
Hello. I have a question about data. In this kind of research, we need to translate our data in numerical data in some point.
You mean like doing a quantitative, well, we might. That's not our primary aim, but we might want to bring in some numbers, so to speak. Is that what's is that? Do you want to pick up on?
I think what's important is when you talk about changing languages or using other languages, what's important is if a child speaks, if I had a child in an English speaking classroom that used Spanish, used Portuguese, and I need to use their language. I may use their language and then use the English translation. But it's very important to capture the primary language that they're using.
Eu posso perguntar em português? Aham.
I don't think we understood.
Mas eu acho que é nesse sentido, de transformar dados qualitativos em dados
Oh,
quantitativos.
she's asking about transforming or also transforming qualitative data into quantitative data. So what I think is, yes, sometimes if you want to make visible some relations, you may want to use some sort of quantitative data in the sense, for instance, I'm going to use an example that makes it maybe more clearer. I was studying the process of transitioning from preschool, from kindergarten into elementary school. In the preschool, I would argue that the children would go to different spaces in the school. They wouldn't just stay in the activity room. They would go all over. But in order to show that, not just to say, to state, I measured how many minutes they stayed in each space because I was video recording, right? I video recorded them in the activity room, in the arts room, in the playground, in the cafeteria. So I got all of my videos and I said, okay, they spent 20 minutes in the activity room, 35 minutes, 40 minutes in the playground, 35 minutes in the arts room, 20 minutes in the cafeteria. So I would say they had a lot of experiences in different spaces, whether in the elementary school, I did the same process, and they would spend 80, 90, 100 minutes a day in the classroom, and only 15 minutes of recess, and only 15 minutes in the cafeteria. So I could argue, I could better argue, I could make visible that in the preschool, they would go to different spaces and they would experience different spaces through numbers, so to speak. They would be going all over the school, while in the elementary school, they would just stay in the room. So in this sense, yes, we are using numbers, but not like a quantitative research per se. I don't know if that helps.
I think you can use, I mean, definitely, you can use both ethnographic and quantitative. It has to do with your research question. And I mean, one of the things that I found in my research is we did a very structured observation several times in 3 of the classrooms, to get, different kinds of information. So I was able to use some of that together with my ethnographic work to make a stronger statement.
I looked at the chat in Zoom, but we have no questions. But maybe the teachers want to ask something. Veronica?
Yes, thank you. I was with my camera off because it's a little lower my network, my net here. Thank you for the seminar. It was very interesting. I'm Veronica. I am teacher at the university, and I am responsible for the organization of this discipline with with Sibeli, Professor Sibeli. And I would know if there were some difficulties in terms of teachers have some difficulties to implement these active methodologies as team, because not all the teachers are familiar with this kind of methods. So I want to know if they received any education, if maybe I lose some part, and I'm sorry if I am doing a question that you have cleared about. But I would to know in what form was conducted the work with the teachers. I don't know if I was clear in my collocation.
I think
Thank you.
You're welcome. I can respond from my study is we did a professional development, a 2-hour workshop on the project. We actually we brought in materials. We had the teachers use the materials and make a habitat. That was their kind of charge, is with these materials, make a habitat. And it was really good for them to do it themselves so they could really see what we were going to do in the classroom, why we were going to do it. And then we got volunteers from teachers. We didn't force this. We said, who's interested in having us come in the classroom and working with us on these materials? So that's how we worked our situation. I think you bring up a good point I think the professional development, the workshop was really helpful because we couldn't have just gone in and said, this is what we're going to do, or even talk about it. They really had to kind of experience it, see what would work for them. I think that's it. Okay. That's it. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Professor Laurie.
Yeah.
Okay.